Tupac Shakur was born on June 16th, 1971. He was 25 years old when he died on September 13th, 1996. In the 5 years of his professional recording career, he became one of the most significant cultural voices in the 20th century. He sold more than 75 million records worldwide. He starred in films. He wrote poetry of extraordinary depth and beauty. He was generating $60 million in revenue the year he died. And he died with $200,000 in his bank account and $4.9 million in debt to a label that owned everything he created because he had signed a contract in a prison visiting room on what has been described as a napkin, desperate to get out, with no attorney solely representing his interests and no understanding of what he was signing away. No will, no trust, no estate plan, and a murder investigation that has never been fully resolved, connected to conversations and arrangements that I was personally present for. This is the most personal episode in Celebrity Estate Interrupted, and it is the most important. I have been thinking about how to open this episode for a very long time. Not because I do not know what to say, but because I know exactly what to say, and I'm choosing every word with full awareness of what it means to say it. Every other episode in this series has been personal to me in some way. Michael Jackson, Stan Lee, Chris held a creative joint venture with POW Entertainment. He was inside that world professionally. Ray Charles, his personal assistant for decades, was one of Chris's closest friends. These connections are real and they are meaningful. This episode is different because this episode is not about proximity to a story. This episode is about being inside one. Christopher Nassif, the man who founded C&A and Associates at 22 years old, who built Diverse Talent Group into one of the top 8 agencies worldwide, who launched Luke Perry, Austin Butler, Sofia Vergara, Chrissy Metz, Ricky Martin, James Vanderbeek, and more, was connected to the world surrounding the investigation into the Tupac Shakur. Chris had conversations with Suge Knight about what happened to Tupac. I was there. I was present for those conversations. I know what was said. I know what Chris believed. And I carry that knowledge carefully because some of what was discussed is connected to an investigation that has never been fully resolved. A man named Dwayne Davis, known also as Keefe D, is scheduled to stand trial in August 2026, nearly 30 years after the shooting. I will not say anything that interferes with those proceedings. What I will say is already a part of public record and what I personally know to be true. Christopher Nassif arranged for Detective Russell Poole to meet with investigators at the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department. Russell Poole was the LAPD detective who had spent years pursuing the theory that the murders of Tupac Shakur and the notorious B.I.G. were connected, and the people inside law enforcement may have been involved. He was the primary investigator on the Biggie Smalls murder case. He co-authored a book on the Tupac murder with journalist Richard R.J. Bond and journalist and filmmaker Michael Douglas Carlin, a man connected to my world directly. He was portrayed by Johnny Depp in the 2018 film City of Lies. He was portrayed by Jimmy Simpson in the USA Network series Unsolved, the murders of Tupac and the notorious B.I.G. Chris made the arrangements. The meeting was scheduled. Russell Poole walked into the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department on August 19th, 2015. to speak with homicide investigators about the case he had spent his life pursuing. He died of a heart attack in that building before anyone came in to speak to him, before the meeting happened, before he could say a single word to the investigators Chris had arranged for him to meet. Whatever Russell Poole knew, whatever Chris believed, whatever was said in those rooms where I was present, it exists now only in the memories of the people who were there. And in a case that is still open, still being prosecuted nearly 30 years later. I tell you this because this episode is about what happens when there is no plan, when the wealth exists without the protection, when the person who might have provided answers is gone before he can give them. Tupac Shakur left no will, no trust, no instructions, and the people closest to the truth about what happened to him are no longer here to tell it. This episode is about all of it. I am Natalie Francine.
And I'm Alexis Nassif. This is Wealth, War, and Real Estate, episode 11, the Napkin Contract.
For women, by women.
I forgot to say
You just got to keep adding, and even when it says you're supposed to be silent, you're talking stuff.
No, I'm not.
Yes, you are.
What was I saying?
Chris was involved deeply with all of it.
That's right.
And it said, be silent.
Oh, I'm sorry. But I have to talk about him. He's my brother.
Okay, but we all know he's your brother now.
I know he does. We do. They do, yes.
That Chris Nassif is your brother.
Yes.
Alexis Nassif.
That's right. My brother. He's a good man.
He is a good man.
Still is.
Yes, his presence is strong.
Very.
True crime moment. Tupac Amaru Shakur was born on June 16th, 1971 in East Harlem, New York City. His mother, Afeni Shakur, was a member of the Black Panther Party. She was on trial for conspiracy charges related to a plot to bomb New York City landmarks when she was pregnant with Tupac. She defended herself in court while pregnant, was acquitted, and gave birth to her son 1 month after her acquittal. Tupac Amaru is the name of an Incan revolutionary, a man who led an uprising against a Spanish colonial rule in Peru in the 18th century. Afeni Shakur named her son after a revolutionary because she intended him to be one, and he was. Tupac Shakur grew up in poverty in Baltimore, in Marin City, California, in circumstances that most people never survive intact. He attended the Baltimore School for the Arts, where he studied acting, poetry, jazz, and ballet. He was a genuinely trained artist, not just a performer, but someone who understood the craft and the discipline of creative work at a level most people never reach. He began rapping professionally as a teenager. By 1991, at 20 years old, he had released his debut album, Tupacalypse Now. By 1993, he had released Strictly for My Niggas and starred in the film Poetic Justice opposite Janet Jackson. By 1995, he was incarcerated. He had released Me Against the World, which debuted at #1 on the Billboard 200. He was the first artist in history to have an album debut at #1 while serving a prison sentence.
What separated Tupac Shakur from most artists of his generation and from artists of any generation was his literary intelligence. He wrote poetry from childhood. He wrote about his mother's addiction, his own loneliness, the beauty he saw in the world alongside the violence that surrounded him. His poem, Dear Mama, which became a song, is one of the most honest and moving pieces of writing about the relationship between a mother and a son in the American artistic tradition. He was not just a rapper, he was a writer. He was also an actor of genuine ability. His performances in Justice, Poetic Justice.
Juice.
Oh, I'm
Poetic
sorry.
Justice, Above the Rim. Go ahead.
And
Gridlock demonstrated a range and a vulnerability that most of his contemporaries did not have.
Directors who worked with him spoke about the instincts, his presence, his ability to inhabit a character with a complete commitment. He was building two careers simultaneously, music and film, and both were reaching extraordinary levels when he died.
True crime moment. In November 1994, the night before the verdict in a sexual assault case in which he was a defendant, Tupac Shakur was shot 5 times in the lobby of Quad Recording Studios in New York City. He was robbed of his jewelry. He survived. He believed publicly and repeatedly that the attack was connected to people he knew, people he had trusted, people who had set him up. The sexual assault case resulted in a conviction on 1 count. He was sentenced to 1.5 to 4.5 years in New York State Prison. He entered Clinton Correctional Facility in February 1995. He was 23 years old. While Tupac was incarcerated, Me Against the World went #1. He was the most famous artist in America, and he was in a prison cell in upstate New York. He had no money to post bail. His legal fees had consumed what he had. His record label at the time, Interscope, did not step in to help. He was, in the most literal sense, trapped. And that is when Marion Suge Knight came. The war. The prison sentence that preceded the Napkin contract is inseparable from the contract itself. Tupac Shakur did not sign with Death Row Records because he admired the label or believed in their vision. He signed because he was in prison. He had no money and he had no one stepping in to help him. And Suge Knight offered him the one thing he needed most: freedom. Understanding the desperation of that moment is essential to understanding why one of the most financially sophisticated creative minds of his generation signed a contract that handed his future to someone else. Desperation is the predatory contract's most reliable tool. True crime moment. Marion Hugh Knight Jr., Suge Knight, was the co-founder and CEO of Death Row Records. He had built Death Row into the dominant force in West Coast hip-hop through a combination of extraordinary business instincts and methods that were, by multiple accounts, deeply coercive. Death Row roster included Dr. Dre, Snoop Dogg, and a collection of artists whose combined commercial power was unmatched in the industry. Suge Knight had connections to the music industry, to street culture, to the kind of informal power that operates outside of legal structures. He had $1.4 million in bail money. He offered it to Tupac Shakur in exchange for a contract. 3 albums. Death Row would own the master recordings. Death Row would control the release schedule. Death Row would collect the majority of the revenues. Tupac would receive advances that would be charged against future royalties. The terms were not unusual for the era. What was unusual was the circumstances under which they were presented. Tupac signed in the prison visiting room on what has been described by multiple people who were present or close to the situation as a napkin, or the closest thing to one. The formal contract came later, but the agreement, the handshake, the understanding, the moment that bound Tupac Shakur to Death Row Records happened in that visiting room with a man who had walked in offering the only thing Tupac needed, and with no attorney in that room whose sole obligation was Tupac's interests. He walked out of Clinton Correctional Facility on October 12, 1995. He was free and he was owned. True crime moment. From October 1995 till September 1996, 11 months, Tupac Shakur recorded with a ferocity that has never been fully explained, except by people who knew him and understood that he was trying to outrun something. He recorded the double album, All Eyes on Me, released in February 1996. 10 million copies sold, one of only 9 hip-hop albums ever certified diamond by the RIAA. He recorded the Machiavelli album released posthumously 2 months after his death. He recorded hundreds of songs that Death Row subsequently released, licensed, and profited from for years. In 11 months after Death Row, Tupac Shakur generated over $60 million in revenue for the label.
His personal financial situation during those 11 months were not what those numbers suggest. Death Row's accounting structure, standard for major labels of that era, charged recording costs, promotional expenses, video production, and advance payments against future royalties. Every dollar Tupac spent on studio time, every advance he received, every expense associated with his career was logged as a debt against his royalty account. The $1.4 million bail was charged against his account. By the time he died, his account showed that he owed Death Row $4.9 million. He died with approximately $200,000 in his bank account and a $4.9 million in debt to the label that owned everything he had created.
True crime moment. September 7th, 1996, Tupac Shakur attends the Mike Tyson versus Bruce Sheldon heavyweight boxing match at the MGM Grand Garden Arena in Las Vegas. Tyson wins by a technical knockout in the first round. After the fight, in the lobby of the MGM Grand, a confrontation occurs involving members of Tupac's entourage and a member of the Crips gang. Later that night, driving in a BMW with Suge Knight on Flamingo Road, a white Cadillac pulls up alongside. Multiple gunshots are fired. Tupac is struck by 4 bullets, 2 in the chest, 1 in the arm, 1 in the thigh. Suge Knight is grazed by a bullet fragment in the head. Tupac is taken to the University Medical Center of Southern Nevada. He undergoes emergency surgery. He survives the initial surgery. He is placed in a medically induced coma for 6 days. The world waits. On September 13, 1996, Tupac Amaru Shakur dies. He is 25 years old. His murder has never been officially solved. I'm not going to speculate about who killed Tupac Shakur. I'm not going to name theories or point fingers or say things in this room that belong in a courtroom. What I will say, what I can say, is that Chris Nassif had conversations with Suge Knight about what happened that night. I was present in the room for those conversations. I heard what was said, and I know what Chris believed. I will also say this. Chris Nassif arranged for Detective Russell Poole, the man who spent years pursuing the theory that law enforcement may have been connected to these murders, to meet with homicide investigators at the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department. That meeting was arranged. That meeting was scheduled. And Russell Poole died of a heart attack in that building on August 19th, 2015, before anyone came in to speak with him. The meeting never happened. Whatever Russell Poole was going to say, whatever evidence he had assembled, whatever names he was prepared to give, He took it with him into that waiting room, and he did not come back out. The war. Tupac Shakur's murder is the most famous unsolved crime in the history of American popular culture. Nearly 30 years after the night on Flamingo Road, a single suspect has been charged. Dwayne Davis, also known as Keefe D, is scheduled to stand trial in August 2026. The investigation that Russell Poole spent his life pursuing, the investigation that Chris Nassif was connected to, is still active, still incomplete, still producing proceedings in a Las Vegas courtroom nearly 3 decades after the shots were fired. The estate of Tupac Shakur has been generating millions annually for 30 years. The murder of Tupac Shakur remains officially unsolved. True crime moment. Tupac Shakur died intestate. No will, no trust, no designated beneficiaries, no estate plan of any kind. Under California law, his estate passed to his mother, Afeni Shakur. Afeni inherited a legal nightmare. The estate owed Death Row Records $4.9 million. The catalog was entangled in contractual obligations that gave Death Row extraordinary control over Tupac's recordings. The master recordings, the actual audio files that represented the most valuable assets in the estate, were owned by a label that had its own profound legal and financial crisis. Suge Knight would eventually be incarcerated multiple times on various charges. Death Row would file for bankruptcy. The legal landscape around Tupac's catalog was, in the years immediately following his death, an absolute war zone. Afeni Shakur was a Black Panther Party member who had defended herself in federal court while she was pregnant. She was not someone who backed down from a fight. She sued Death Row. She fought for the master recordings. She established Amaru Entertainment, named for Tupac's middle name, and for the Incan revolutionary, whose name Tupac carried, as the vehicle through which she would manage her son's recordings and his legacy. She released posthumous albums. She negotiated licensing deals. She fought the label in court and outside of court. She turned $200,000 and $4.9 million into debt into an estate that is generating millions annually by a few years of Tupac's death. By the time Afeni Shakur died in May 2016, 20 years after her son, she had built the Tupac Shakur estate into one of the most valuable posthumous music estates in history, generating approximately $11.5 million annually.
What Afeni accomplished is extraordinary by any measure. She did not have a trust. She did not have an estate plan. She did not have the infrastructure that a properly structured plan would have provided. She had her intelligence, her determination, and the legal standing that California's intestacy law gave her as Tupac's surviving parent. And she spent years fighting for what should have been available to her from day one. The litigation with Death Row, the negotiations over catalog rights, the licensing battles, the posthumous release strategy built without a roadmap from Tupac himself. All of it improvised, all of it fought for from scratch, accomplished despite the absence of a plan, not because of one, but despite it. She did a good job.
True crime moment. Afeni Shakur died on May 2nd, 2016. She had managed the Tupac Shakur estate for 20 years with extraordinary devotion. Upon her death, the estate passed into a trust managed by executor Tom Wally, a former Warner Brothers record executive. In 2022, Tupac's sister, Sakaya Shakur filed a lawsuit against Wally alleging that he had embezzled $5.5 million from the estate. The lawsuit accused Wally of using the estate as a personal financial resource, making unauthorized payments to himself and withholding financial information from the family. It accused him of failing to properly account for the estate's assets, refusing to distribute property belonging to family members, and withholding Tupac's personal belongings, his cars, his jewelry, his artwork, his gold records, from his family. The lawsuit alleged that Wally had been systematically misappropriating estate funds for years. The Tupac Shakur estate in 2022 looks remarkably like the Tony Bennett estate in 2024. One person with complete authority over a valuable estate. Other family members with no visibility into what is happening. A gap between what the estate should contain and what the family can verify. A lawsuit seeking an accounting that should have been provided automatically. Afeni Shakur spent 20 years building something from nothing, from $200,000 and $4.9 million in debt, and then died without the accountability structure in place to protect what she had built. The absence of a plan compounded across generations. The War. The Tupac Shakur estate is the most complete illustration in this series of what happens when the absence of a plan compounds across time. Tupac died without a plan. Afeni spent 20 years building one from scratch. Afeni died, the estate passed to an executor with no accountability structures. And 20 years of her extraordinary work became the subject of an embezzlement lawsuit. Each generation inheriting the damage of the generation before. The plan is not just about protecting what you have built. It is about ensuring that what the people who love you build after you are gone is also protected. The single most dangerous myth in estate planning, the one thing that costs more families more money than any other, is the belief that estate planning is something you do when you are old. Tupac Shakur was 25 years old and generating $60 million a year. Prince, 57, and had built a kingdom. Matthew Perry was 54 and had $120 million in his trust. None of them had done everything they needed to do. Two of them had done nothing at all. The moment you have assets that matter to you, a home, a business, intellectual property, a catalog, a bank account with meaningful money in it, relationships you want to protect, children you want to provide for, you need a plan. Not someday, not when things settle down, not when you have more time, now.
The specific protections that would have changed Tupac's story and that apply to every woman in our audience, building wealth at any age, a will designating who receives your assets. So the state does not make the decision for you under intestacy law. Afeni received the estate because California intestacy law gave it to her. That was the right outcome, but it was luck, not planning. A trust that holds your assets privately, so your financial details never become a public court record. The probate proceedings that followed Tupac's death exposed the full picture of his financial situation, the $200,000, the $4.9 million debt to anyone who wanted to read it, a contract review practice. Any agreement you sign, any agreement at any stage of your career must be reviewed by an attorney whose sole obligation is to you, not to the label, not to the manager, not to the person offering you what you need most at the moment you are most vulnerable. To you, an intellectual property management plan. If you create anything, music, writing, art, a brand, understand who owns it and what rights you retain before you sign anything. The Napkin contract did not just take Tupac's current catalog, it took everything he would create for 3 albums. It took his future. An executor or trustee with mandatory accountability structures. Afeni Shakur's 20 years of stewardship was extraordinary, but when she died, the accountability structures that would have protected what she built were not in place. Build them in at every stage.
Absolutely. That's where
That's the main thing.
Yep, making sure all bases are covered. It's
Completely.
not that simple anymore.
No, it isn't.
I have been careful throughout this episode, careful about what I say, careful about what I do not say, careful about the line between what is mine to share and what belongs to proceedings that are still active. What I will say, what I can say without reservation is this. Chris Nassif understood what happened to Tupac Shakur. He had conversations that most people never had access to. He arranged a meeting that was supposed to bring some measure of truth into a proceeding that had been denied it for decades. And Russell Poole, the man who was supposed to walk into that room and finally say what he knew, died in a waiting room before anyone came in. This is not a metaphor. This is what happened on August 19th, 2015, in a building in Monterey Park, California. A man who spent his career pursuing the truth about the most famous unsolved murders in American music history died before he can say a word of it. Tupac Shakur was 25 years old. He had written some of the most honest and beautiful and angry and tender poetry of his generation. He had a mother who loved him with a ferocity that turned 20 years of legal wreckage into a legacy. He had a sister who fought for what was his, and he left them nothing to work with. No will, no trust, no instructions, no protection. Give the people you love something to work with. Do the work now while you are here, while you can choose what happens, while the people who love you do not have to fight a record label or a court system or any executor who may or may not have their interests at heart. Do it now, not someday, now.
One more episode, the series finale. Every case, every lesson, everything you have learned across 11 episodes, distilled into the framework you take with you. Episode 12.
The verdict.
Yes, the 20-year question for this week. If you died tonight, who would speak for you? Who would fight for what you built? Who would have the legal standing from a document you signed, not from a courtroom battle, to ensure that your wishes were honored and your people were protected? And if the answer to that question is uncertain, what are you doing tomorrow to make it certain?
I am Natalie Francine. This is Celebrity Estate Interrupted.
I'm Alexis Nassif. This is Wealth, War, and Real Estate.
For women, by women. See you at the verdict.
Bye-bye. Thanks for listening.
Bye-bye.
And